The Hall Mills murder. This case took place about 100 years ago. This case is known for its murder. Let's talk about how the murder happened and who is responsible for the savage attack, or if there are any suspects in the murder. In September of 1922, two bodies were found lying on the floor. They were discovered by two couples, Raymond Snyder and Paul Balmer. The two were walking together in Somerset, New Jersey, near a farm. As they were walking down a road, they discovered what seemed to be two couples lying down near a crab apple tree. Raymond and Pearl went to check up on the two and greet them. But as they were getting close, both Raymond and Pearl noticed flies surrounding the two bodies. Both Raymond and Pearl were confused as to why there were flies. That was until Pearl noticed that both couples were not breathing. Raymond and Pearl were in shock. They had left the scene and telephoned the police. Officers were dispatched to the scene. They found the two deceased bodies, both male and female. Both bodies were lying flat on their backs. Both were shot in the head with a pistol. The two officers noticed the bullet had entered the man's head into his right ear and exited through his neck. The woman was shot under the eye and over the right ear. Officers also noticed the woman's throat had been slashed. The two bodies were positioned side by side, both their feet pointing toward the crabapple tree. The man had a hat that covered his face while his hand touched the woman's head, and for the woman, her left hand was touching the man's thigh. Both couples were identified as Edward Hall and Eleanor Mills. Edward Hall, a 41-year-old priest born in 1881, and Eleanor Mills, a 34-year-old parishioner born in 1888. There was an examination of the two bodies. As mentioned previously, both were shot. Edward Hall was shot in the head, instantly killing him, while Eleanor Mills was very brutal. Her throat had been cut open, her tongue and her vocal cords had been removed. There were also maggots inside of her throat, hinting the couple had been dead for more than a day or so. The detective noticed some valuables were still with both bodies, leading the crime to be a killing rather than stealing. No weapons were found at the scene, not even the knife that had been used to slash Eleanor Mills' throat. But there was a love letter that was torn and scattered after the murder. The love letter written by Eleanor Mills said,
"I know there are girls with more shapely bodies, but I do not care what they have. I have the greatest part of all blessings, a noble, deep, true, eternal love. How impatient I am and will be. I want to look up into your dear face for hours as you touch my body close."
And Edward Hall wrote by saying this,
"I just want to crush you for 2 hours. I want to see you Friday night alone by a road, where we can let out, unrestrained, that universe of joy and happiness we call ours."
It was obvious they liked each other, even though they both already had spouses. Eleanor Mills was married to James Mills in 1905, and the couple had 2 children together. Edward Hall was married to a wealthy woman named Frances Stevens in 1911. Around 1919, Edward Hall fell in love with Eleanor Mills. They liked each other, and it was said that they were in a sexual relationship together. Almost everyone in New Brunswick had already known that both Edward Hall and Eleanor Mills were in love. Both couples had gone on a date to Atlantic City. By September 1922, there was a meeting at a church. Both Edward Hall and Eleanor Mills were there at the meeting. However, this would be the last known meeting for both of the couples, because the day after the meeting, both would be found dead. After the murder, others, including the investigators, started making theories. One of the biggest theories was that Edward's wife, Frances, was the one who did all this, mainly because she was very wealthy, and she had came from a powerful family, meaning she could have gotten away with this, and she was very close to Edwards, because she was the wife of Edwards, obviously. But there was no solid evidence that she could have done all this. Investigators also suspected her brother William Stephen was in on this because he owned a .32 caliber pistol similar to the one that was used in the murder. But the weapon was modified, meaning the gun was intentionally not be able to fire, so he doesn't hurt anyone or himself. Another reason why people thought it was him was because of his fingerprint that was on the card Edward Halls had during the crime scene. But authorities found out everyone who was at the crime scene had touched the same card, so there's no evidence leading William Stevens to be the killer. Another suspect investigators thought was the killer was Henry Stevens. Because Henry was a marksman, they thought he fired the shot at both Edward Halls and Eleanor Mills. But he claimed that he was nowhere near the two couples when the killing had happened, and this was backed up by other witnesses who were with Henry. So none of these three suspects were guilty of the murder, mainly because there was not a single evidence that tied up to the killing. And of course there were witnesses. During the killing, there was one witness who had seen all this happening. The witness was Jane Gibson, or the pig woman. Because she raised many pigs, she had lived near where both Edward and Eleanor had died. According to Jane, she had heard her dog barking non-stop, so she had gone outside to stop the barking, and that was when she saw a silhouette in her cornfield. She had thought someone was stealing her corns, so she rode her mule towards the cornfield, and when she got closer to the silhouette, she noticed there were more than one person in the cornfield. There were two, and one of them shot at another. She saw that person fall to the ground, and she heard another person screaming. It sounded like a woman begging, don't, she said. And as you know it, another shot was fired directly at the person who was screaming. Frightened by this, Jane quickly rode back to her farmhouse. To others, her story seemed fake because she kept embellishing each statement she had made. And every story or factual evidence she had made up seems to come out of newspapers. But the police still believed it, and still no hard proof of who the killer is. 100 years later, no one truly knows who killed Edward Hall and Eleanor Mills. All we can do is just make up theories and speculations. But most people still think of Frances mainly because she had power and money. And back in the day, even if you murdered someone, you could still possibly get away with it, if you had the money and the power, of course. But like I said, there is no solid evidence if Frances killed the two, and there probably will never be any evidence, to be honest.